For everybody that's listening to us for the first time, we have a returning guest. If you're listening to us for the first time, please subscribe and share this interview. Senator Allen is here. And if you're listening to us on the radio, I should say, definitely keep it up. But Senator Allen, a former senator from Virginia, former governor from Virginia, and everything else in the kitchen sink, he was in the state house. I mean, this guy knows politics in and out as far as Virginia and around the country. And I'm grateful that he always comes on and gives me the time of day to do an interview. So, Senator, thanks so much.
Great to be with you, Rob, and all your listeners as well, all across the country.
And you gave me some very good leads from YAF, and I'm having, I believe her name is Morgan on, or Megan, I forget who, but anyways, regardless, she's one of the top dogs over there, and I'm just looking forward to hearing that interview of what's going on there. So I appreciate you doing that.
Well, I appreciate you doing what the Young America's Foundation does, and they're focused on young people. And a lot of your listeners and you and people I run into all over are so concerned about the lack of education young people have gotten in states that were shut down, lost education for a year or two. We see it in Virginia with our previous governor, who was very dictatorial in shutting down schools. Governor Youngkin has liberated Virginia. But the states that stayed open, like Florida and Tennessee and Texas and Georgia, they haven't had the loss in learning that the shutdown states have. Then you're worried about what's the intolerance on college campuses. And the Young America's Foundation is focused on young people in college and also high schools. And it's good to have young people learn about history and learn about Ronald Reagan in particular, and his leadership of peace through strength and trusting free people in the free enterprise system, and the booming economy and opportunities that arose from his policies.
Well, we wish we had a Ronald Reagan now, and I guess I was going to talk.
I do too. I have a sticker on the back of my Bronco that says, "I miss Ronald Reagan." So, Rob.
Okay, well, fair enough. And since we went into Ronald Reagan and, talking about what happened with the Soviet Union and, his part in, really putting the Soviet Union in check, let's talk about Ukraine right now. I was going to talk about the elections, but we'll put that on the back burner for a second because everybody's hearing about all that junk now. Ukraine is a scary thing going on right now. My question is what I'm scared about is, it seems like after the election, there's going to be some issues with Ukraine. And you've been in the room, you've dealt with Iraq, you've dealt with Afghanistan. So obviously it's different than the Ukraine issue, but you've been in these rooms where foreign policy is being decided. So tell the viewers about this it seems like Putin is trying to, he's really in control. Ukraine is winning some places back. But what's going to happen after the election when the Republicans are in power, when the U.S. is really putting billions upon billions of dollars into Ukraine? They are standing tall. They are winning back. But, Senator, how much more money can we put into Ukraine when our country is falling apart at the seams right now?
Well, if you want to have a strong military, you have to have a strong economy. And that's where you just can't have a strong military and a weak economy. And I think of what would Ronald Reagan do? Ronald Reagan would stand up to Russia and their aggressiveness. And by the way, our European allies and NATO are also making a major effort in it, not just with arms and money and humanitarian aid, but also taking in refugees. And you're not seeing any fallback on that. In fact, Finland and Sweden, who've always been obviously aligned with our economic policies, have joined NATO. So this has backfired on the miscalculations that Putin has put in. Reagan would support, like against the Sandinistas, the freedom fighters in a place like Nicaragua. And so I think it's very important that we do support the freedom-loving people of Ukraine who are willing to fight for their own country. What they need are the supplies and the armaments to defend themselves. I know there are some people, and you're right on this, Rob, that there are some in the Republicans who are saying, "Oh, we don't want to provide any more aid." I think that the aid that'll come. There's also to be a scrutiny in any sort of spending. I don't care if it's military spending or social spending. You want to make sure that it's being used efficiently. But I can't see us just saying, "Oh gosh, we're not going to help Ukraine any longer," and let the European countries or NATO countries take the whole risk. One of the things that Reagan understood, and hopefully Americans have now understood, is the importance of energy. Russia's sole source of revenue, or predominant source of revenue, is oil and natural gas. And European countries are captive customers of Russia. Meanwhile, unlike Ronald Reagan, we have an administration in the Biden administration that is demonizing coal and oil and natural gas. Now, if we were, and just a few years ago, we were energy independent, energy dominant. We were exporting and could export a lot more natural gas. But what they're doing with the policies in Washington is thinking we're going to run our entire economy on intermittent, unreliable, expensive wind and solar power. You could have some backup or supplemental power from solar, sure, but you're still going to need these fossil fuels. You're still going to need oil, still going to need natural gas, still going to need coal, and you're going to need nuclear. And then Germany made themselves even worse off by having an overreaction to the Fukushima disaster, nuclear disaster in Japan, and shut down their nuclear. And now they realize, wind and solar is not going to power our economy. They're buying a lot of coal, by the way, from the United States, keeping their coal-fired power plants going. So some of this energy policy is a major effect on the inflation, affecting Europe and the United States, but especially Europe. And the United States to a large extent as well, with higher gasoline prices, higher food prices. Farmers need, obviously, energy to plow and plant the crops and harvest and transport it. And so everyone's affected by unnecessarily higher energy costs. Europe even more than the United States. Now, Reagan started really ramping up American energy. He looked at American energy as a blessing, not a curse, to keep in the ground. And that's what hurt Russia. As energy prices went down, Russia and the old Soviet Union didn't have the same revenues they were getting in from the sale of their oil and natural gas. So we need to have a productive energy policy in our country. The Ukrainians need to be supported. Otherwise, if you let Russia get away with this, and Putin, this will only encourage further behavior. Then we really could get into another war where they're attacking, say, one of the Baltic countries, whether it's Lithuania or Latvia or Estonia, which are part of NATO, and we're obligated, if any one of them, NATO country, is attacked, we are responsible to keep our obligations to defend them. So I think that Russia needs to be repelled, and I think we need to support the Ukrainian people. I understand there's a different point of view with some people, but I don't think isolationism is the way that we ought to go. We need to be engaged, and we ought to, and just like the days of Reagan, is stand strong for freedom and help those who are also fighting against autocratic rule.
Well, you touched on a lot there, so I'm going to kind of divvy it up into sections and let you answer.
Okay.
So first things first, it seems like the Biden administration is not really speaking too much. I know Secretary Austin is speaking somewhat to the Russian foreign minister. On the communication is pretty weak from what I'm reading in the news. It seems like this, that in the 80s, it wasn't as bad as it is now with, the Russian United States relationship. Sure, there was that, peace through strength, like you just spoke about with Reagan, but there was that buffer zone, like we have nukes, you have nukes, we're not even going to bring it up. Now people are talking about nuclear war like it's just some kind of regular small war. And there's no diplomacy by the Biden administration. They look very weak. The president at times I gotta watch how I say this. Doesn't look like he's there mentally.
Yeah,
I'm trying to play the
I
line
understand. I
here.
think where you're getting to is that Putin thinks that he can get away with this, and
Correct. Yes. Thank you for
our resolve is not strong. And I think a lot of that was caused by the debacle of the withdrawal from Afghanistan last August. The whole world saw that. That was just such a poorly. I mean, it's what you could say we're leaving, but you don't take the troops out first. You get the civilians out first, and and you could say, well, gosh, we shouldn't have left. Well, President Trump wanted to leave Afghanistan too, so we were going to leave. It would have been, I think, you could look at it.
They left all. Sorry to interrupt you, Senator, but they left all the military equipment there. They left the dogs that saved these troops' lives. These military dogs, they're heroes too. They left some of those dogs there. Yeah. I mean, this is disgusting.
Oh, yeah, you get your equipment out. I mean, it's just basic warfare is if you're retreating, you blow up the arsenal so your enemies don't get it. If you're not going to be able to get it all out and remove it from that war, the theater of the war, then you blow up. You don't hardly want to have your ammunition, your armaments falling into the hands of your enemies. And so that the whole thing was just a disaster. So I think from that, you can see Putin figuring, all right, these folks are weak. They've lost any taste for war. They're just in full retreat mode and so forth, that maybe we can get away with this. And I think they miscalculated, though, in that while the Afghan forces weren't able to fight off the Taliban and all those forces, the Ukrainians are fighting for their freedom. And I don't think they thought that Ukraine would fight. They thought they'd cut and run. And that was a major, major miscalculation on the part of Putin. And they have a much greater love of country in Ukraine than Afghanistan did. Afghanistan, if you actually, they're not even comparable other than the military aspects of them thinking the U.S. is weak and is withdrawing. Is Afghanistan's like 6 different tribes, different languages, somewhat different ethnicities, really, and divided by a mountain range. And there was no great love of country other than they like to fight invaders. Ukraine has a genuine love of country, and the Ukrainians are willing to fight and die for it. And they're fighting very expertly. They're also more sophisticated. They're more sophisticated in armaments. They were part of the Soviet Union at one time, so they have nuclear power. It's a much more developed civilization and culture in Ukraine than the tribal third world conditions that are in Afghanistan.
So let's talk about this, and I want to get your opinion on what you feel about, because we're still talking about Ukraine, and then we'll move on. 21 years of war, Afghanistan, Iraq, now we're doing Ukraine. 21 years of war, debt and deficit up to our eyes. What do we do here? Because the country is in shambles. The infrastructure stinks everywhere. I know they passed the infrastructure bill. It's very minimal, not a great bill. Very, very low as far as what we really need in this country. Where are we going to cut? Are we good? If you cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, these programs, the Democrats will use it against you every 10 seconds in an ad. And the seniors in Florida will go berserk, and everywhere else around the country. You cut defense, the defense hawks will be going up there, they'll be pissed off too. Where do we cut if we're going to continue sending billions upon billions of dollars with the economy in free fall right now? Looks like a recession. I've heard people saying that this could be a depression. I mean, this could get pretty damn bad, and we don't have enough money to fund all this.
Well, you have to set priorities. National defense and national security are the top responsibilities of the federal government. It's at the state level. The top 2 responsibilities, in my view, are education and law enforcement. And the way you pay for it is with a vibrant economy where people are working and businesses are prospering, you get more revenue in. Now, at the federal level, they have mistaken, in my view, priorities. They want to hire more IRS agents rather than border security. That's a national security issue there too, on our southern border. And it's not just the rule of law, it's people coming in illegally. If you reward illegal behavior, you get more illegal behavior. It's just common sense. The other aspect of this is the fentanyl and illegal drugs that are coming in. And these are deadly drugs. This is not marijuana. This is this fentanyl.
But Senator, the Senate isn't like when you were in there. A lot of these people, they're just trying to get on Fox every 10 seconds. They're trying to get their soundbite out there. They're trying to run for president or governor or wherever they want their next term. They're not looking to get anything done. This is Democrat and Republican, a lot of these people. It's not the John McCain. It's not the George Allen Senate. It's not, Judd Gregg. These people are not deal makers. They're just trying to play up Trump or play up whoever they can. Biden, if it's the Democrats, well, not so much anymore. But anyways, they're just trying to play people up so they can move up to their next office. And it's just a lot of talk and no action.
Well, there's got to be action. And obviously there's elections in 2 weeks from now all across the country. And so the voters, this is a representative democracy. It's a republic. And you end up with leadership and public servants that reflect the will of the majority of the voters in their districts and states. And so you have to discern who is actually who's running on an agenda that agrees with the people and has the integrity to keep his or her promise that if they get the honor of serving, that they're going to keep their word and get these agenda items or these promises kept. The southern border situation is awful for our country. Now, here's what they're spending money on all this so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Really is the Green New Deal. And what does that mean? It means we have unreliable, unaffordable, costly energy. And that in itself is harmful to our competitiveness, our quality of life, our cost of living, and our national security. In the event you had productive energy policy in America, looking at our coal, our oil, our natural gas, as well as nuclear, as ways of powering our country, we'd have a prospering country. You'd actually get more federal revenue in because from all these leases, the federal government can make trillions of dollars. Then it also helps our balance of trade. We're not having to beg Saudi Arabia and other unreliable countries to increase their oil production. It helps our balance of trade, and it's a national security issue in that we can help our allies as well as make money and jobs here in the United States. I think this will be a big issue that, for example, the Pennsylvania race for the U.S. Senate. The Democrat has made statements against hydraulic fracking in the Marcellus Shale. That's a big revenue generator and a big job creator in Pennsylvania. And so, that helps the economy. Then you've had a federal government that is paying people not to work. This is a waste of money. If you talk to any employer, they have job openings, but they can't find people to work. And I think what we need to do is something similar to what I did when I was governor, and other governors did too back in the 90s, is if you're getting welfare, you're going to have to do some public service work. It's not going to be a permanent way of life. We need to restore the work ethic rather than rewarding idle behavior. That saves the taxpayers money, but beyond that, it gets people working, productive, and leading self-reliant, independent lives. And that's good for their children to see as well, as opposed to here's another check and we'll just sit on the couch watching TV.
Two more questions on Ukraine and Russia and all this stuff going on. Saudi Arabia, you just brought up. We're seeing this BRICS alliance. China, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Russia's involved in it. There's some African countries that are involved in this. The petrodollar looks like it's on its way out. It's gone kaput. it seems like this is going to be a real big problem for this country. And you know what? We might be extremely powerful now. I hate to even say this because I don't want to seem unpatriotic, but when you get Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia, what are the gas prices going to be like? $12, $13 a gallon? I know you just brought up fracking and, energy independence. This is more than energy independence. These countries are really allying together against the United States, not to mention Iran and North Korea.
Yeah, right. Everything you're saying is true. But on energy, we can control our own destiny. We have more natural gas, we have more oil, we have more coal than and coal can be gasified, it can be liquefied if you needed to do so. The point is, we don't have to be so vulnerable to these hostile countries, or some of them just unreliable. I'm not going to say Saudi Arabia is hostile to us. I think this has become more of a personal thing between Saudi Arabia's monarchy and Joe Biden and the comments he's made. Because Saudi Arabia probably, if Netanyahu wins in Israel again, there's been a rapprochement or relationship with Saudi Arabia and Israel that's never been better and can continue to improve, because their big concern is not Israel. Their big concern is Iran getting a nuclear weapon. Yeah. And some of the Gulf states have made those Abraham Accords with Israel, and they're allowing Israeli flights over Saudi Arabia and so forth. I'm not going to defend any monarchy anywhere as an ideal source of government, but they're not as hostile to us or Israel as they had been in the past. The point is, if the United States really had a rational, productive energy policy, we'd be controlling our own destiny. The cost of food, the cost of gasoline, the cost of diesel, the cost of electricity would all be much less. The policies that the Democrats are proposing are regressive. They use the term progressive, but they're regressive. The people hurt most by having to pay $20 more every time they fill up with gas, or paying much more for groceries and food and so forth, are not the wealthy elites who can fly in their private jet to some UN climate conference in Paris or Cancun and drink tea with their pinkies up and being the lords of the world and saying this is how it'll all be, and we'll just need to be spending more on this and that and the other. The people hurt the most are lower and middle income working families who are struggling to get by with this inflation, paying unnecessarily higher prices. And it's really because of these counterproductive, blissfully idiotic energy policies in the United States the last 2 years.
Just quickly on the BRICS, issue also, we're seeing China is kind of infiltrating in the continent of Africa. Right. There was an issue I believe a year back, where they built the African Union, the new building, and they were putting, I don't know if you heard this, but they were putting so they could listen into the conversations. They were bugging it, is the correct terminology. I've talked to some people that live here. This guy that ran for Congress, actually from Rhode Island, I interviewed. He was a former African. He was asylum seeker here, and he actually said that a lot of the people in a lot of the countries in Africa are not too excited that China's really trying to build up Africa. We look at the birth rate, and it's Africa. These people, there's no condoms. I don't want to go into sex ed with you, but the birth rate in Africa is sky high. This is, our birth rate in this country is unfortunately low, and that's another story for another day. But Africa is really going high, and China's trying to infiltrate the natural resources in those countries, and also really build up alliances there, because they know what's going on there. We're not even there in these countries in Africa, really, from what I'm researching. I think this is a problem. Like, what is going on? And, we can't just blame this all on Biden. This has got to go back to other presidents before Biden, because Africa just didn't come, we didn't just find out that Africa had these resources yesterday.
Yeah. Well, China goes into these countries, and because they have whatever mineral or energy resource they have, China will come in and they say, if you give us these contracts, we'll build this road for you, we'll build this bridge for you, we'll build this building, whatever it may be.
So they're like the IMF for these countries then.
Right.
Yeah.
And then these countries become indebted to them. Right. And then when they default on their debt, China's completely controlling it. And the United States and freedom-loving countries, there are things like OPIC, not OPEC, OPIC, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and others that will make loans to development in these other countries. And it is important to help these countries increase their agriculture productivity and be on their own for their own sovereignty. And that ends up helping, world trade, helps the whole world. China is just much more aggressive as far as, we call it foreign aid, which ends up getting criticized. Some of this foreign aid is very important to try to help out these countries. A lot of them are corrupt, but a lot of them also need a lot of money, and China will come in there and they'll invest and do all sorts of things that help that government, help the people, at least initially, and then they're indebted to them. And they're the goal of the Chinese is not to spread democracy or human rights. That's not the reason they're involved in it. They're in it because they take a cold, calculating view. We need bauxite, or we need oil, or we need whatever the critical mineral or mined substance may be. And they don't care if there's children having to mine it. Yeah. They don't have any of the same environmental standards or labor rules that we have or the civilized world has. And so they exploit that. And that's part of the challenge. China's by far, I know we're focused, and understandably so, on Ukraine and Russia. China's a bigger threat. That's the other thing. China is watching the U.S.'s resolve. Their general view is that the U.S. will tire, and they just don't have the staying power, and that that someday they could do whatever they want, whenever they feel like it, to take over Taiwan, which would be awful as well.
Well, they're on their way. I mean, we have poor leadership here. What they've done in Africa, obviously, huge continent. They have a lot of control there. They have control on, the import, what they're importing into our country. I know a lot of the stuff is in the Dollar Tree places and all this stuff, but a lot of people, they can't afford to buy stuff.
Several things.
Yeah,
right.
Go ahead.
And I think some of the manufacturers are switching their manufacturing. It'll take a while, but switching to a place like Vietnam or Indonesia or Malaysia, Bangladesh, and so forth. The one thing we need to do in foreign policy as far as Asia, and it is being started, and I think it maybe started with Trump, but it's being carried forward by the Biden administration, is Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, and India. India is really key. One of the things when I was in the Senate, can't see it behind me, is the India-U.S. civilian nuclear pact. India is the largest democracy in the world. We're the oldest, but they're the largest. We need to have India on our side, and so you can't just have, so that China doesn't, just have some counterbalance. The Philippines are also key to keep good relations with them, because what if some of the things that China is doing in the so-called South China Sea, in that area, is taking over areas and land. They're islands at this point, but they're in Philippine territory. So we need to not just say it's U.S. versus China. You want to have South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, India, Australia, New Zealand, and those countries with us as well, and not be so dependent for manufacturing on them. The whole USMCA with U.S., Mexico, and Canada is have more manufacturing. If it's not going to be done in the U.S., then have it done in Mexico or Central American countries. Whenever I look at where everything's made, every shirt, every hat, I don't care what it is. It could be a TV antenna. I always like to see where they're made. I'm always happy to see if it's USA is what I like to see the most. But if it says Canada or Mexico or Haiti or Colombia, great, or Taiwan or South Korea or Japan, at least those are with countries that we're in alliance with similar values.